Your welcome is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you get a great rate in car insurance, even if it's not with them. They have this nifty comparison tool that puts rates side by side, so you choose a rate and coverages that work for you. So let's say you're interested in lowering your rate on car insurance. You visit progressive.com to get a quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's rate, and then their tool will provide options from other companies, all lined up and easy to compare, so that all you have to do is choose the rate and coverages you like. Progressive gives you options so you can make the best choice for you. You could be looking forward to saving money in the very near future. More money for, say, a pair of noise-canceling headphones, an Instapot, more puzzles, whatever brings you joy. Get a quote today at progressive.com. It's one small step you could do today that can make a big impact on your budget tomorrow. Progressive Casualty Insurance and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states and situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
And there's nothing going on tonight. We could leave the city alive, or maybe just get drunk and stay inside.
Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us a returning guest, Thaddeus Russell, author of Renegade History of the United States, head of Renegade University, and someone who's in the middle right now of a big S-storm on Twitter and elsewhere. So I wanted to have you on to discuss an extremely sensitive topic that people have a lot of understandable feelings and emotions about. Can you explain? So here's my perspective on this. You had a professor, Stephen Kirschauer. How do you pronounce his name? I'm sorry, Dad.
Kirschner.
Okay, from SUNY professor.
Fredonia. Yep.
SUNY Fredonia, and you guys were discussing pedophilia and age of consent laws. And let me explain why this is an issue that I personally have taken interest in. I have written all my books, or most of them, about the subject of evil. So the North Korean book, Dear Reader, is written from Kim Jong-il's perspective, and I went there and I, understood their perspective. I was at Charlottesville as part of my research for the book on the New Right. And when this Jeffrey Epstein stuff was happening, I pitched a book to my agent called Junior, History of American Pedophilia from Grover Cleveland to Jeffrey Epstein, because Grover Cleveland, the only non-consecutive president, married a girl who he knew since she was a baby, the second she hit 18. This is something people don't appreciate. And I did read my agent said to me, is this really research you want to be doing? And that was actually a good point as to why not to pursue this. But a good friend of mine, Matt, and he asked me to use his name. When I was on Rogan, I told his story. He came out to me recently as having been the victim of childhood sexual assault. And the point I made on Rogan is it's not at all right that only people who are victims of this have to speak up about it. It's incumbent on, I think, all of us, insofar as I want to sound like a commie, but when children are hurt, they've suffered enough. He's done enough. Like, it doesn't have to be on him. Then now he has to talk about him or other victims. They could just be like, I don't want to talk about this. I've lived through this. But the clips that went around on the internet, it really seemed to many people that you and this professor were somehow belittling or condoning or validating this perspective. And from my research on this subject, the issue that seems to come up that most people don't understand is that the argument, there's been a lot of recent also rebranding. There was a professor who was recently fired because I don't remember the pronouns, I'm sorry. The professor had written a book trying to rebrand pedophiles as minor attractive persons, trying to make a distinction, rightly or wrongly, between people who have this attraction and people who actually act on this attraction with children. National Review, I think, had a piece trying to make the point that this is some kind of a mental state as opposed to something that is a choice, which you can easily make that argument for, although I don't know the validity of this. So what is your perspective, and can you tell me how it felt when this all blew up? Because this interview on the podcast was a year ago, I believe.
Yep. It was in December of 2020, and many thousands of people watched it and listened to it since then, and there was no controversy about it at all, really. I don't think anybody commented on it. The clip that was posted by Libs of TikTok on Twitter was, I think, like a minute and a half or so. It was a very short thing, and it was the very, very beginning of the section in which we talk about the subject. And I introduced it by saying, you know, I have defended adult child sex in the past, which I have. Now, what I meant by that, now that's where the clip ends, right? And so, of course, people see that and say, oh my God, this guy's defending pedophilia. Let me say what my position is on the kinds of people and abuse that you're talking about. And I said this on Twitter last week. I said it last summer on Liberty Lockdown podcast. I've said it publicly many times. I'm actually fairly extreme on this compared to a lot of people. I mean, for people who have abused or raped children and who can't control their urges, they need to be in concentration camps far from everybody. I mean, I think in the desert, far from even the prison population, they need to be totally separated from our society. And that's just the way that is, because if they can't control themselves, they are, of course, definitionally rapists, because children, of course, are always going to be vulnerable to them. So that's not even a question. And then if I were to discover someone abusing or raping a child, I mean, abusing or raping anyone, but especially a child, I would want to kill them. There's no doubt about it. Would I do it? I don't know, but I most certainly would want to. And so that's what was really sad about what was lost in this. When Stephen and I were discussing the issue, we were simply talking about the moral and philosophical and legal justifications for age of consent laws. At least that's what I was doing in that interview. And so I just took it for granted that people would assume that of course I would want to fucking kill pedophiles. I mean, who abuse children. So we didn't address that. My feelings about that are very clear, and I think I stated that. Now, what we did was we went through all of the arguments, or the major arguments, that have been used to defend age of consent laws in this country. And that, to me, is where things get very, very tricky and difficult. And people simply haven't addressed this issue because because of the taboo. We can't discuss it at all without getting called a pedophile, right? We can't just even enter the conversation without being called a pedophile. So we can get into the specifics of that, but that is my position on the abuse or rape of anyone, but especially children.
But he brought up the argument that kids are forced to go to the dentist, or they're forced to go like to karate tournaments, so right. Kids are not really in position to make consent, so that's fallacious. And I think to try to compare children and sexuality and getting your cavities filled, a very unfortunate choice of words I just made, is really disingenuous. I don't know what word I would use, but I don't think that's a valid comparison at all.
No, I mean, he was going after the argument, and I have too in the past, the argument, simply the legal justification that because it's coercive, right? Sex with a child is coercive, it must be illegal, right? So that's all. We were just taking that particular specific argument and saying, well, we coerce children all the time, doing all sorts of things, and not just taking them to the dentist, but we coerce them into doing stuff that's dangerous for our own benefits and pleasure. Like, how many fathers have forced their kid to play tackle football, right? This goes on all the time. The world is full of coercion for children. So to say this one thing must be carved out just doesn't make sense legally. That's all.
But I mean, I'm going to put the law as an aside, because I don't think anyone is going to dispute that age of consent laws need to be discussed, if at the very least, in order to figure out what they should be. So you have to have a discussion there. And I think most people would agree that, a 16-year-old with a 20-year-old is not at all analogous with a 16-year-old and maybe a 50-year-old. And it also doesn't make sense that in one state, if I'm 16, I could have this relationship, and then I cross the board the next state and my life is ruined. There is something's not adding up there. I think that's fair. Right. But so I'm going to talk about this from a moral perspective. I mean, the state, in my opinion, is secondary, but do you not see an enormous difference between forcing a child or encouraging a child to play touch football, which is something they do, as opposed to a child being introduced at a young age, let's say 10, into a world of sexuality, which they might not be psychologically prepared for? Or is it your case that someone who's, let's say 10, this is just puritanical thinking that all kids are ready for sex?
Of course, it's a massive difference. Of course. I'm simply saying just the specific discrete argument about it being coercive and therefore it should be illegal. That's all we were going after. But of course, it's massively, fundamentally, qualitatively different than playing football or any other thing, right? And for that, I simply say, as for all things regarding children, I defer to the parents, which is imperfect, but I just think we have to do that. I know some libertarians actually go much farther and they want to grant autonomy, total autonomy to the children. I don't do that. We've got to defer to the parents on this question. So if parents think any relationship with their child is improper, they can do whatever they want about that. They can stop it. They can attack the guy, whatever it takes. I am entirely for parents' autonomy on this. I said this last summer. I said it in my podcast. But that's rather than society having one blanket rule, right, that applies to everybody. I say leave it to the parents and maybe the community, but certainly the parents and the family need to be the ones deciding what their children are doing. And if that's stopping them from any kind of intimate relationship with an adult, please do that. That's certainly what I would do if I were a parent.
I love that we still have Fume as a sponsor. Quitting smoking is the best thing you could do for your health, and Fume can help you get there. Fume is a natural inhaler designed for a better, safer, and natural way to quit cigarettes. No smoke, no vape, no nicotine replacement. What it replaces is that hand-to-mouth habit of smoking, which is that ritual, which is so hard for so many people to break. Fume is made of 100% Canadian maple. They have these cores infused with plant oils that are studied to curb cravings. They have flavors like peppermint. Conquer has minty notes to stimulate menthol cigarettes. Lemon Berry Bliss for sweet experience. Their flavors are all 100% natural, no chemicals, no flavors, and absolutely no nicotine. Guys, smoking's expensive. At the very least, you're going to be saving yourself a lot of money. Quitting is tough, but Fume can really help. And they've got thousands of 5-star reviews from smokers who tried everything else, and this works. Whether you're a smoker or an ex-smoker who still struggles with cravings, Fume is the perfect tool for you. It's time to create positive habits and quit naturally Fume. And I'm glad to be a part of helping to make it easier. If you head to breathefume.com/malice, breathefum.com/malice, use promo code malice, you get 10% off your order. You're going to save on cigarettes you aren't buying. You're not going to have to buy breath mints. Your teeth won't be as yellow when you save on your initial purchase of Fume. That's 10% off your entire order when you head to breathefum.com/malice and use code malice. Lots of you have tweeted at me how you've used Fume to help you quit smoking, and I, for one, could not be happier. How much money are you paying in interest on your credit cards every month? It's probably too much. So why not consolidate all your credit cards into one payment at a lower fixed rate and start saving money? You can pay off your credit card balances and save with a credit card consolidation loan from LightStream. LightStream's credit card consolidation loans have rates as low as 4.98% APR with autopay and excellent credit, which is much lower than a national average interest rate of almost 20% APR. Just for my listeners, apply now to get a special interest rate discount and save even more. The only way to get this discount is to go to lightstream.com/welcome, lightstream.com/welcome. Subject to credit approval, ranges rate from 4.9% APR to 19.99% APR and include 0.5% autopay discount. Lowest rate requires excellent credit. Terms and conditions apply and offers are subject to change without notice. Visit lightstream.com/welcome for more information. I think what people are concerned about, and I'm sure you're concerned about this as well because you are a parent, is that a enormous percentage of childhood abuse and childhood sexual abuse comes from within the family. This is kind of the dirty secret that people want to paint to be the priest, the teacher, the gymnastics coach, but far too often it's the calls coming from inside the house. Eleanor Roosevelt is one example. When she was a kid, they had to put the locks on the door inside her bedroom because her uncle kept coming in there. It's not clear what was happening, but I'm sure they weren't playing bridge. So when you have the argument for, and this, when people ask me what the strongest argument is against anarchism, this is the answer I give. Because if you do have this system where basically the parents are in control of the child, you're going to have no mechanism for saving kids from being complete victims of depraved parents.
That's a very excellent point. And that's right. That's why giving parents autonomy over their kids, sovereignty, essentially, is problematic in many ways, right? Not just in this way, but of course, in this way, you're right. Most rape, I think this is true, molestation, et cetera, does come from inside the family. But what does that mean? Do we then want to take away all the rights of the parents? I mean, because they oversee everything in the kid's life, right? And this is a much broader issue as to how much power we give to parents over their children. I mean, I don't want to take that power away from parents to stop a pedophile from
Sure.
raping their child, right? And I want to start there, most importantly, rather than going simply to the state with its one size fits all rule for everybody, right? Which, as you said, is just becomes ridiculous because from state to state, it's different. From country to country, it's different, the age of consent, right? And the way it's, of course, enforced. And we haven't talked about the sex offender registry, which is why I got involved in this issue in the first place. It's a horrendous thing that's going on. I mean, absolutely horrendous what's going on to 1 million people. And the thing about that sex offender registry, many of the people on it need to be on it. They probably need to be like in a concentration camp, actually. But there are also hundreds of thousands of people on that registry, and they're on it for life, who were convicted when they were teenagers. You know, I mean, it's ruined the lives of many people who none of us would think need to be prosecuted at all. And then there's the trickier situation, which we also have to talk about, of the big age gap, where we all are just revolted when we hear about the numbers, you know, you name it, 12, 13, 14, whatever, and an older man, an adult man. Now, what do we do? Now, I'd say in the moment, if the parents caught that happening, you do whatever you want, parents. You want to stop that, please do. And I would. But what do we do in the many, many, many cases, many of them are famous, where that relationship persists into adulthood for the younger person, and they end up becoming married and have a long-term relationship. And importantly, the minor originally in that relationship never thinks of it as abuse or rape or molestation or anything. What then do we do about that guy, usually a guy, in that situation? Do we call him a pedophile, put him in prison, put an ankle bracelet on him forever? That's, to me, you know, many of our grandparents, by the way, and began their relationships like that. I mean, we pretty much all know someone who started a relationship that way. What do we want to do retroactively is the question.
I think that you're kind of whitewashing it a little bit, because it's also extremely common for people who have been, even adults. Date rape is a great example. There, like a lot of people push back on feminists that say, oh, a lot of times it was regret, and she's later saying it was date rape. But the other thing happens as well, where it was rape, and rather than the girl, or the man who's the victim tells themselves, well, I wanted it anyway, or it wasn't a big deal. So they do convince themselves that they had retroactively, in fact, given consent. But one thing I do want to talk to you about is this, before we get to the sex registry, which I think is a very important and taboo subject, because I think it's kind of this same with drug laws. It used to be lock them up and throw away the key. And then you realize someone's selling weed and they've got life in prison without possibly parole. And we're like, wait. Like, so we took a wrong turn somewhere. And if someone is like 17 and slept with a freshman in high school, that they can't get a job till they're 60, I think most people realize this is disproportionate. As well as someone who's a murderer who gets out after 6 years and can kind of get a job, there's an asymmetry there. But the argument that what libertarians don't like to admit, and what gay rights activists don't like to admit, is that pro-pedophilia arguments have been there from the beginning in both of these movements. This is the dirt, like NAMBLA with the gay rights movement, early Libertarian Party activists, the guy who translated Max Stirner's book, or rather reprinted it, The Ego in His Own, wrote poetry advocating for pedophilia under a pseudonym. When you're trying to take down laws, it's going to attract certain types of personalities. And the argument that they make is that these kids are not being raped. They are just giving consent, but the only reason that they regard it as abusive is because the rest of us are too uptight and we give the kids a complex. Do you agree with that argument?
Again, I mean, so in the moment, I leave it up to the parents or the family or whoever the caretaker is, the adult caretaker. I don't know who else to leave it with, the decision to make about this thing, right? For me, I'm going to stop it. I mean, I can't imagine a situation, you know, when my son was a child, of ever allowing any kind of intimate relation with an adult with him. I never would. I couldn't imagine that. And I'd probably go a lot farther if I found out some guy was trying to seduce him, right? So, and also the attempt, that professor, I forget, I think it was at Old Dominion or something, and then NAMBLA, the argument there has been, as you said, to normalize it, to make it okay, to make it okay. It is a sexual orientation, but I don't want it anywhere near us as a society. We can't have that if it's not controlled. If they can't control it, they have to be removed. So that's not my argument at all. I'm simply talking about the age of consent laws and the tremendous damage that's been done to so many people in enforcing them. And I don't even have an answer. I don't have a number. I'm just saying we've got to examine this. And we also have to know that the United States has much higher age of consent laws than the rest of the world, pretty much. I mean, at the very minimum, we've got to like agree among Americans. We have different states with different numbers. It's crazy that you're a pedophile rapist in one state for doing something, and the next state over, you're just fine. Because the age of consent is different. So no, I do not take the NAMBLA position. I'm no interest in normalizing it, except to say, yes, it's a sexual orientation, but that doesn't mean it's a good thing. And in terms of pedophiles being pleased about what I'm saying, I would be surprised by that, given what, I mean, I want to put them away in concentration camps, and I would very likely attempt to kill one if I came across one doing that to a child.
So do you disagree, though, that there is this one of the things that I think conservatives are completely terrible at is that a lot of times ideas will slip under the radar into the mainstream, and by the time they're aware these things are happening, that it's already resolved and they're fighting defense very subtly. I think right now, and I'm not going to say this is the end of society, but it's certainly up ahead. There is going to be a push toward normalizing or glamorizing things like polyamory. I think the seeds have started to be, and that's a conversation people have, but that's between adults. Do you disagree that there is this kind of subtle attempt from Hollywood and other agencies to try to sexualize kids?
Oh my gosh. I mean, so Western, well, certainly American culture, I think Western culture in general for about 150 years now has been gradually and intellectually sexualizing children at younger and younger ages, and also just sexualizing childhood, I suppose. I mean, let's look at porn. My goodness gracious. I mean, the number of incest porn videos that are on Pornhub, and stepmom this and stepdad this and something's going on in this country, you know. But that's not coming from liberals. I mean, that's people just watching porn. Apparently they want that. And, you know, we really need to have a conversation about that. And then, of course, you know, in the sort of non-porn popular culture, same thing, you know, cuties, even though I don't think it was like the end of the world, it certainly did sexualize girls. And we do see more of that. We see girls dressing more and more like sexy women now, right? I mean, that started in Europe and now it's come over here. Again, I don't know if that's a plot by the liberal elite. I sort of doubt that, but it is certainly happening, and it's been happening in popular culture, as I said, for a century, right? I mean, the culture has just gotten more and more sexualized in general, and that's part of it. But I don't think it's part of a plot.
I'm not saying it's a plot by some liberal elite, but I'm saying that there are like here's an example. You were on my podcast, or I think you were on mine, and the example we didn't really delve into it at length. I would get into it now. Was this drag kid? Desmond is amazing, right? And drag is very bawdy. It kind of has vaudeville roots, very sexualized humor, not very subtle humor. You know, a lot of jokes about genital sodomy, oral sex, so on and so forth. So when you have this, I don't know how old he was, 10-year-old kid at these venues performing dances that are, sexual dances, and being around naked men at that age and being photographed with naked men. There was a photo of him with Drag Race winner Violet Chachki. And then to have this kid on Good Morning America telling the most banal population in the whole country, white housewives, that this is basically the same thing as playing checkers. That to me is an example of this kind of brave new world where things that if you thought about it for 5 seconds would at least raise eyebrows, but are presented as, like just like oatmeal, like just nothing even worth commenting over.
I don't know that case at all. I mean, you and I like mentioned it briefly, I think at one point. I don't know the specific case though, so I don't really want to comment on that. But I mean, so I can say this, American culture in particular has put a brick wall between sexuality and children, right? We are horrified, except for the stuff that goes on in popular culture. But in terms of like what we're allowed to say about it, you can't have anything sexual at all that is anywhere near a child, right? We're just not allowed, they're not allowed to be sexual. And there's no right answer as to what should be allowed, I don't think. I mean, I don't know, but I don't think it's necessarily healthy to never talk about sex around children. Should they be drag queens and talking about particular sex acts in public? I doubt it. I don't know. I have to see it. But, I do think that we have to have a talk about that too, like a general conversation about whether we want to try to keep the whole world of sexuality out of children's heads entirely. It's impossible, especially now that, porn is a click away for everyone. It's just unhealthy, right? And instead of like talking about it, we just try to shut it out. But I think we need to talk to kids about sex and sexuality in serious, real ways that aren't scary, that aren't, trying to indoctrinate them, that aren't, and certainly not trying to seduce them or manipulate them. But I do think it's unhealthy in America that, again, we have this big wall between sexuality and children. I don't think that's healthy.
Yeah, but I think the issue is it's one thing to sit down with kids, tell them the birds and the bees, tell them, there's something that you're all going to have to deal with as an adult. You take seriously.
Yeah.
But when you're a kid and you're joking about it, that kind of gives it a sense of irreverence. And this isn't a big deal. And I think that's the slippery slope, because it often is a big deal.
Here's the thing I really don't like about the drag queen thing, as far as I understand the case. They're promoting sexuality, like a way of being through the kid. They're using the kid to promote this thing. They're promoting it to the kid. I mean, I think it's highly unlikely that a 10-year-old would know any of this stuff or care about it, right? They clearly got it from adults.
Yes.
I hate that. That is completely not okay to me.
But you've spent so much time attacking Puritanism, and you, better than anyone, have explored how Puritanism is so prevalent in our culture that we think we're so far removed from Plymouth Rock, when how could that be when we're the same people in many ways, other than those of us who are immigrants, but certainly it's permeates our culture. And you use that very much as a negative word. When is Puritanism okay and when isn't it okay?
Puritanism is great for building nations. I mean, the discipline that's inherent and it's central in it, that built our bridges and our roads and our government and our tanks and our factories and all of it, right? It's also important in regulating your body, your individual life. Even though I'm famously anti-Puritan, I basically live like a Puritan. I mean, I work all the time, I'm always disciplining myself. I'm very orderly. I obey the time, and I stop myself. This is the important thing. This is the relevant thing. I stop myself constantly from acting on my urges to do other stuff that's not work, that's fun or pleasurable, right? And sex is one of those things, right? Constant regulation of myself. Now, if I didn't do that, if I didn't regulate myself, I would get nothing done. I would be, I would live a very bad life. So I've never said that Puritanism must be thrown out entirely. It's absolutely necessary. I think on page 4 of my book, I say we need some element of Puritanism in any society, or else we'll look like Haiti, or we'll look like a third world, nightmare of a country. No interest in that.
Guys, we got a different kind of sponsor for this episode. It's the Jordan Harbinger Show. It's a podcast you should really be listening to. Every day, someone tells you just have to listen to some podcast, and you nod and say, sure. You don't listen to it. Don't let that happen here. Jordan's Show, which Apple named one of its best of 2018, is aimed at making you a better informed, more critical thinker, so you could get a sense of how the world actually works and come to your own conclusions about what's happening, even inside your own brain. Because each episode is a convo with a different fascinating guest. And when I say there's something for everyone here, I mean that. One episode, he's talking to a hostage negotiator from the FBI. Another episode, it's a cinematographer who discovered a lost city in the jungle. Jordan's always focusing on pulling useful, practical insights from his brilliant guests. Not talking about pop psychology or some self-help stuff. The episodes are loaded with bits of wisdom you can use to change your mind and improve your life right away. And if that's not worth checking out, I'm not sure what is. I know it isn't, and that's part of the problem. Total waste of time. We really enjoy this show, and we think you will as well. Search for the Jordan Harbinger Show. That's HARB as in boy, IN as in Nancy, GER on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And the URL is jordanharbingershow.com/subscribe. On Apple Podcasts at jordanharbinger.com/iTunes. And if you want to learn more about Jordan, interesting guy, go to jordanharbinger.com/about. Guys, lots of you suffer from poor quality sleep. You get headaches, you get sore eyes from staring at your computer all day. And there is something that will help you solve this problem. And it's called BlueBlock's blue light glasses. They've got computer glasses with clear lenses. They've got blue light glasses with yellow lenses for migraines and stress. And then they've got blue light blocking glasses with amber lenses for poor sleep and fatigue. Other brands don't really compare to Blue Blocks because Blue Blocks is made in optics laboratories in Australia. It's not mass produced in factories in Asia. They've got stylish frames, so you'll look cool. You can see them in GQ and in Vogue. The technology is backed by science. They're tested to ensure that they work, unlike other blue light glasses companies. And they're more expensive than other brands, but guarantee that they're worth the extra investment because those brands don't work. Ever since people started wearing Blue Blocks, they don't get eye strain, they don't get headaches, you sleep better. They have all sorts of different things. And no matter what you need, they have it. They've got the non-prescription. They've got the prescription. They've got the reading options. Glasses for every need to help. Blue light for helping with digital eye strain. Summer glow for helping with low mood and migraines. And Sleep Plus for improving your sleep. Easy returns, easy exchanges. They ship worldwide in rapid time. Go to blueblocks.com/you're welcome. Use coupon code welcome. You get 15% off. That's BLUBLOX.com/you're welcome and use coupon code welcome to save 15%. Let's get back to the show. This is going to be a softball question, but I still want to hear your thoughts on it. Do you agree with my earlier contention that it is a good thing that more people who have been victims of abuse, not just sexual abuse, come out, that they are, because what I was fighting against on Rogan, and which I feel very strongly, is if you have been a victim of abuse as a kid, you shouldn't have to keep this as a secret or regard it as a stigma. You should be able, just like if, I don't know about if your mom was an alcoholic, or your dad hit you and you told me this, I wouldn't think you're a freak or a monster or a wounded bird. I'd feel bad. I'd feel sympathy for you. I'm like, that's really awful that happened to you, but I certainly wouldn't think worse of you or differently of you as a person. Whereas if you came to me and said, these things have been done to me as a kid, lots of people would freak out. They wouldn't know how to react. So there's an enormous disincentive on you or someone who had been a victim of this to keep their mouths shut. And I know this because after I discussed this on Rogan, I had several other of my friends come out to me privately. I had strangers messaging me saying, I've never told anyone this. So if just me knew immediately like 6 people, that means I know way more than 6. And I think it's maybe it's part of that wall you're talking about, because people understandably don't want to think about this. Right. The people who have been victims have to keep that silence through their whole lives. And that to me is an enormous injustice. You've suffered enough. You shouldn't have to feel like people won't be friends with you, or they won't be able to make jokes around you, or they'll think you're some kind of pariah. They should still love you just the same and have their heart, bleed for you.
That's a huge point. I believe the taboo on discussing the subject at all further victimizes those people, because as you say, they feel like they can't talk about it because it's so nuclear, so radioactive. And there's so much shame, even when you're the victim, right? There's shame attached to this. And that's because, again, the repression around the subject itself, we simply can't talk about it. And because we can't talk about it, it gets harder and harder to talk about it when you're a victim, because you feel like the worst possible thing happened to you as a child, and therefore you must be irreparably damaged. And it's so shameful and so dirty and so awful that it can't be spoken. So you live with the secret forever. So it's a double victimization. This is what I'm about. I'm about talking about the subject. I don't have a prescription for particular policies. I'm not going to tell you a number for what an age of consent should be. I'm saying simply that we need to talk about these things, that there are major problems with the law as it is, and that several of the arguments on behalf of the law don't add up to me.
There's another issue that I think people had with those clips that went viral on Twitter, and it's this. I have a chapter in my book, The New Right, which defends dark humor. And there's examples of humor about the worst kind of subjects. But at the same time, absent the state, because we're not talking about the state yet, there's certain subjects that I think really need to be treated with kid gloves. I'm not going to talk to you jokingly about, hooking up with your mom or something like that, because that's completely inappropriate. It's offensive. And there's certain other subjects. So when people saw you and that professor kind of smirking and joking around, it felt like this was an issue that you weren't taking too seriously. Do you think it's wrong that there are like kind of stigmas around treating certain issues glibly?
So I never treated this subject glibly at all.
Okay.
I certainly never would. My feelings about sexual assault are too deep for me to imagine ever laughing about it. The little smirk I had in that clip was, you can watch the interview, you can see this. I mean, I was making a joke about how this was not the best thing to do for your career, Stephen. I said this
Okay.
to him, and that was the laughing. It was about, I was laughing at this guy who I discovered making these incredibly wild arguments out there at the philosophy department at Fredonia. And I'm like, how did you get away with this? And why would you do this? That's what that was about.
So do you feel now, I don't know if guilty is the word, but as a result of your interview, this guy's had professional major career consequences. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
I think it's terrible. SUNY is trying to get him fired. He's a philosopher, and he was talking about philosophy, and that's what that was, the philosophy of this issue. That's true, and he does it in a completely out there wild way, but I think that's useful. I mean, it's a way to talk about these issues that we don't ever talk about. And who does it harm? I guess I don't see who it harms by listening to his ideas about the philosophy of this. So I have tremendous regret and a fair amount of anger about what's happened to him. I think he should be allowed to speak. And if you don't like it, talk back to him,
Well, I think who it harms is a lot of people who are pedophiles who, if you have this orientation, as you put it, most of them don't see that there's anything wrong. They certainly didn't choose to, in their minds, to have this approach. So to have someone who is in some way laying the path for them to be normalized, that I think is the concern.
Okay. You said it was harmful for pedophiles. You mean it was actually helpful? Is that what you mean?
Well, no, but it's harmful for everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah. I got you. Yeah. I suppose, I mean, it's, well, I mean, I'm opposed to the death penalty. Does that encourage murderers?
That's an argument to be had. Sure. You can make that argument. I'm opposed to death penalty as well. Yeah.
Right. I mean, but that's the argument that's been made. I mean, I was opposed to the Iraq war. Does that mean I was pro Saddam? That's that kind of argument. I don't quite get it.
Well, I think the argument is they are very much kind of right now, as you said, there's a wall, to separate pedophiles from kids. That wall is not very efficacious, especially in places like Europe. You hear these cases that were swept under the rug because the consequences of investigating them were politically incorrect. There was some issue in Loudoun County, which I'm not at all privy with the exact details, but this was the situation. Schools, public school teachers, this gets swept under the rug all the time because the teachers unions and other things. I don't want to necessarily lay fingers on such a delicate subject, but so they're basically, and for a long time have been, trying to get over that wall and to be accepted and to say, look, just because I have these ideas doesn't mean I'm going to do anything about it. But their closet argument is, as you know from the literature, they're not doing anything wrong. Everyone else is just too uptight. These kids aren't being hurt. That's the basis of their ideology.
Oh, well, I mean, and I say to them, I'm encouraging everyone to get a gun for them when they show up at your house. I mean, that's what I said. I've said this before. I've said it now. I will always say that that's my answer to people who try to rape kids. I want everyone to do whatever they can to stop that from happening.
But they don't see it as rape is the point. And they're trying to get everyone else to not see it as rape.
But I do.
Okay.
So I don't know.
So that's okay. That's the point of clarification.
Or whatever the parents decide. If they think it's rape, then I leave it to them to make that decision.
But again, so you're saying, like, if I don't want to Kathy Newman you, but if the parents decide that this 8-year-old can have this relationship, is it your view that no one else should have an opinion?
I mean, I don't know. That's horrendously. It's hard to even contemplate a parent doing that.
But we don't have to contemplate this because people sell their kids into sexual slavery around the world all the time. This is not a hypothetical.
Point.
It doesn't have. In fact, the producer from CNN just got fired because he was working with a mom and he was going to teach her kid how to be a sub. This is headline news that happened here at a major news network in the last month. This is not a hypothetical.
It's horrible. No, you're right. That's a very good point. And I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know. I don't know what to do in that situation. I think it's pretty rare, but it could happen. You're absolutely right. It could happen. What do you think we should do if parents decide that their 8-year-old can have sex with someone?
Imprison them for life.
Okay.
An 8-year-old. This is not an ambiguous question for me. If the kid's prepubescent, if it's at an age where it's not a thing, this is not really. It's even worse. I'm stammering because this is so beyond the pale.
It is. I mean, sure, I can't even contemplate it, but I mean, sure, something has to be done. It's just sure. The state, I
Okay.
suppose. I mean, so yeah. So of course, the state has to step in there, and that, there's no way I would ever want an age of consent law that's that low. I mean, not
Okay.
even close to that. No, of course not. Yeah, no, we
Okay.
want. Yeah.
So let's talk about this sexual assault registry or sexual predator registry, excuse me, and the argument about age of consent laws. And as I said earlier, we have to have conversations about age of consent laws because they've got to be set somewhere. So to say that like somehow we automatically know what they should be is fallacious. Another thing is, I think most people would agree that, or maybe you disagree, but an older man and a younger girl, as opposed to an older female and a young boy, or homosexual relationships, the dynamics in those are not the same. So to have age of consent laws be the same in all those cases are not necessarily going to have probably just outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of variations, right? That's my point about having one rule fit everybody. I don't think it makes sense.
Guys, I don't know if they're my favorite sponsor, but they are the sponsor that's closest to me, if you know what I mean. And if you know what I mean, that's Sheath underwear. Why do I love Sheath underwear? First of all, it's the most comfortable underwear you're ever going to wear. What makes Sheath unique is their dual pouch system. The company's founder, Bobby, spent a summer in Iraq, and he's like, this is not working. So all that heat makes you uncomfortable and Sheath takes care of that. And what makes them special is their dual pouch system. So they've got one pouch for one part of your boy parts, another pouch for another part of your boy parts. First time you try them on, you're going to be like, this is weird. And then you're going to be like, how could I not have this every day? This is so fun and comfortable. Support the underwear that supports you, that's Sheath. All you got to do is go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice, and you get 20% off. And you'll be a lot closer to becoming a studly underwear model, such as myself. That's sheathunderwear.com, promo code Malice to get 20% off. And the underwear that I designed is launching soon. So you want to get on board with Sheath. I love this product and I wear it every day. Guys, you ever feel like you're being followed around the internet and maybe advertisers know a bit too much about you? Well, our sponsor, IPVanish VPN, is here to help you take back your privacy and help you become anonymous on the internet. What is it? IPVanish is a virtual private network, VPN for short. It's a tool that helps you safely browse the internet. So you can use a VPN on your computers, tablets, phones, even your Fire Stick if you're streaming media. When you use a VPN, all your data is encrypted. What you're reading, what you're searching, what you're watching, what you're doing. That's important because what you're doing on the internet is no one's business but yours. And for listeners of the show, IPVanish is offering 65% off their annual plan. That's only $375 a month. IPVanish is super easy to use. You turn off one click. It runs in the background, helping to protect you while you're browsing the web. And if you do run into a problem, no worries. IPVanish has 24/7 support by email, chat, and phone. Go to IPVanish.com/Malice. Use promo code Malice, MALICE, to claim your 65% savings. Their annual plan is just $44.99 for the first year with our discount. This is the time to sign up because with our discount and their promotion, you get a VPN for 65% off their usual offering. And IPVanish is the best of the best. They've got a 4.7 out of 5 on Trustpilot with over 6,000 reviews. Remember, it's IPVanish.com/Malice to get the deal and start protecting yourself online.
This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Pedicy.
I love hearing people's stories of resilience and grit. This is why I created this podcast.
We are very excited to welcome Jim Gaffigan, Yasmin Mohammed, Glenn Beck, Tim Dillon, Abigail Schreier, Jeff Garland, Ayan Hirsi Ali, Sam Harris, Heather Hying, Jonah Goldberg, Ben Shapiro, Glenn Greenwald, Sarah Shahi, Colin Quinn.
If there's a culture of victimhood, then let's tell stories of grit and survival.
Subscribe and listen now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's get back to the show.
I mean, it has terrible consequences too when you do that.
Can you talk about that registry and what are some of these unforeseen consequences?
Sure. Yeah. So it's about 1 million people on it. I think it's maybe 900,000 at this point. And I think a couple 100,000 of those were convicted as teenagers. So that would be, those are called Romeo and Juliet relationships. So be a 19-year-old and like a 15-year-old or something, anywhere in there, right? And then we have also, there are many men who have been convicted for urinating near a school in public who are on the registry. Then there are, by the way, there are actual pedophiles who have actually attacked children who are on it too. And we've talked about them, and they should be on something worse than that, I think, or at least more segregating than that.
Wait, can I ask, is this registry kind of a one-size-fits-all scarlet letter?
Yeah, when you're on the registry, the government notifies everyone in your neighborhood when you move into the neighborhood.
So if someone had sexually assaulted an infant, or if someone had been 20 and seduced a high school kid, they are legally identical in this registry?
Yes, as I understand it, they're both on the registry for life. They are barred from entering large swaths of public space, like whole cities are barred from them. They can't get jobs often. They have to put this down on their job applications. And as I said, there's a notification sent out whenever they move someplace to all the neighbors in that area. So yeah, if you're the 19-year-old who had sex with your 16-year-old girlfriend and you got convicted, that's you. You're gonna get that for the rest of your life.
So how did this registry come about?
The registry starts various states in the 90s, I believe, and just different way. Everyone should go watch. I had David Feiga on my show to talk about his movie Untouchable. It's about the sex offender registry. And he follows the lives of 4 people who are on it, and he follows the lives of the politician in Florida who kind of pushed the big sex offender registry law there. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the history too much, but I do know it was in the 90s that they started enacting this.
So let's talk about the different age of consent laws. Like, what are they in different states? And you were saying you're comparing it to other countries. What is it like in other countries, and how do we compare?
So in the states, it ranges from 16 to 18. There's some states that are 18, some are 16.
Wait, can I interrupt you? So it's 18
Sure.
years old. So if two 17-year-olds are intimate, they're both legally culpable?
If two, no, no, I mean, I'm not sure what your question is.
Meaning, okay, if if the age of consent is 18, right? I'm 20, I'm with a 16-year-old, I'm legally culpable.
No, they don't they don't prosecute a minor for having sex with a minor.
Okay.
It's only if you're above the age of consent law and you have sex with a minor, right?
But what is the average age for Americans to be losing their virginity? I don't think it's 18.
I doubt it. I don't know. Good question.
Okay. Let me look this up right now.
But the age of consent laws in Europe range from 13 to 16.
Okay.
And I believe the average is around 15 in Europe. So it's significantly higher here, and that's true for most of the rest of the world. I think.
So just to interrupt you, I'm sorry. According to the Atlantic from 2014. Oh wait, no. The average age of virginity loss is 17.4.
That's according to surveys.
Yeah, I'm just. I mean, that's the data that's out there. Take it with a grain of salt or whatever.
Right. So people are sexual before the law, right?
Of course. So it's going to be a bell curve, right? You're going to have.
Yeah.
If the average is 17, you're going to have a big chunk 16 and 18, and then a smaller chunk, 15 and 19. Yeah.
Right. But in Europe, as I said, like the average is right around 15. And that's true for most of the world. So,
okay. But America, it's 18, you're saying?
It goes from 16 to 18, depending on the state.
How heavily do you have any information as to how heavily these laws are enforced?
I mean, I don't, but pretty heavily if we have 1 million people on the registry.
Well, not necessarily. It could be that 10 million are doing it.
Well, I mean, how much child abuse gets prosecuted? Probably a tiny percentage, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm sure most of them get away with it. Yeah.
Look, and I want to make one more point. There was a New York Times article not that long ago that were trying to crack down on child pornography.
Yeah.
And they were saying they were so understaffed that they could only worry about the infants who are being filmed in these pornographic films. So when people say that, this isn't that big deal or it's minor, because in their minds this never happens, it's a much bigger problem than I think any of us realize, because we're oblivious to it. We're not looking for this kind of thing. Right. So it would never cross our desk. Right. So, but if there's a market for it, and there's people who see a way to make money or get thrills from it, and those two have figured out how to meet each other thanks to the wonders of the internet, and the children are the ones who are being irreparably, whatever the word is, harmed.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, that's slavery. That's child slavery, sex slavery.
Oh, of course. Wait. So you said in that clip that you've been making arguments for 25 years in defense of adult child sex. Can you clarify again what you meant by that and what those arguments were?
I meant I meant the quote adult
Yeah.
child sex of a 19-year-old with a 15-year-old girlfriend, or retroactively a relationship, that becomes a marriage later. What do we do about that then? And I have generally defended people not going to prison when they're 50 years old and their wife is 46, and and they started when she was 16 or whatever it was.
So
That's
what were those
that's what I meant.
arguments? What were those arguments, and what kind of pushback would you get from your students?
Well, the arguments I made here, I got not a lot of pushback. There were a couple students who were upset by it, but yeah, no, it was hard for people to hear, but they listened for the most part, most students, and worked through it with me. But there was definitely a couple who were upset by it.
But what upset them so much, in your opinion?
I don't know. They didn't tell me. I mean, these were, undergraduates, so they were new to the ideas. I don't even know what specifically was upsetting to them. They didn't tell me. But, I talked about like the Romeo and Juliets, the 19 and 16s and 15s. And again, the retroactive thing, what do we do with a relationship that ends up being like a marriage? And there's so many we all know someone who's in a relationship where that started that way. We all know someone. It's that common, especially gay men. Very, very common.
Oh yeah, that is, you're right. That is.
Yeah.
So what was your reaction? Milo got canceled over this because he was on a podcast. He
Right.
talked about the first time he lost his virginity was to a priest, I believe, or a preacher, whatever it was.
Mhm.
And he was kind of joking around about it, and about Father, I think his name was even Father Mike. And I discussed in my book, again, that in any other culture, any other context, excuse me, this would be an attack on heteronormativity. It's very normal in gay culture for an older man to kind of initiate a younger man
Right.
into the lifestyle. It's not the same with straight relationships. And at the very worst, this is someone who had been the victim of abuse, who was doing his best to kind of put a facade of normalcy or trying to deal with it. And he was being punished more for what he had experienced. But it did sound like he was saying this isn't a big deal.
I can't even tell you how many gay men have told me a similar story, that was the first sex they had was with a man when they were a boy, and the vast majority of them had no regrets about it.
What
So
about
that's a fact.
Sure, but the vast majority, but what about that minority? What was their kind of perception of it?
What do you mean? I don't know who.
You were saying the vast majority of them told you that they didn't regret it, right?
Oh yeah,
But that leaves the minority who did look back on it like this was
Sure.
something bad.
I mean, I actually have never heard anybody who did regret it, but I'm sure I know some have. What do we do about that? That's the question we have to have as a society. Do we go and round them up, those men 20 years later, 30 years later, and put them in prison? I mean, do we stop it at the time? Yes, of course. We stop it at the time when it's happening. But once it's happened and it's many years later and the so-called victim doesn't think they're a victim, what do we do about that?
One of the things you're kind of made your name on about uncovering and writing about some of the seedier aspects of American history to great effect. Your book, The Renegade History of the United States, is really revelatory and eye-opening. Have you done research into this topic and how it became the status quo of something that's such a taboo issue?
No. I mean, the only thing that I've read on this in any serious way is Freud's thesis, which is that the taboo on incest was invented in the modern age to build civilizations, to build modern civilizations. His argument is that in the family is the sort of the training ground for civilization, and because of that, it has a hierarchy, must have a very well-established hierarchy. And so if the parents are having sex with the children, then the hierarchy gets all messed up, and therefore there's no model for civilization. That's why civilization, he says, it's just a theory, has pushed the taboo on incest so strenuously. But that's all I know. I don't know the history though. Yeah.
One of the consequences of this kind of going wide was you had tweeted out that you were getting all sorts of messages and including death threats. I mean, what kind of volume are we talking about, and how seriously are you taking these threats?
Well, I mean, many of them were just open on Twitter. I mean, sort of
Oh, okay.
amazing. Twitter just allows people to talk about wood chippers, on Twitter. And then DMs, my DMs are open. They're always open. I haven't, by the way, blocked or reported anybody. I've gotten on DMs maybe 30 or 40 death threats.
But like explicitly, like, I'm going to do something to you.
Oh, not specific. No, just, you better watch yourself, or say your prayers, or I'm going to come
Okay.
bring in the wood chipper or something. It's sort of indirect. Yeah.
As a consequence of this kind of becoming controversial, James Lindsay, who's a friend of the show, he was going to teach a class at Renegade University and he
Mhm.
pulled out. Did he contact you ahead of time? There was something he just did publicly.
Yeah, he said because it happened. This all happened right on the day that we were going to start teaching class, and he said it's just too much of a distraction.
What was your reaction? What was your reaction to that?
It was. He was right. Yeah, it was too much of a distraction. I didn't hesitate to postpone the class. Yeah.
Is this something that uh, do you think this is going to have like severe deleterious effects on your career?
I don't know. I mean, I talk about the show Unregistered has always been devoted to talking about ideas that we're not allowed to talk about, right? And that's my book. Renegade History is the same thing. Renegade University, that's the ethos. We talk about any idea, and we are willing to and interested in talking about any idea. It doesn't mean we endorse anything necessarily, but it's the radical openness to ideas that I'm all about. So I will continue to do that, and people who are interested in following me in that are welcome to join me.
It must be overwhelming. I mean, can you tell me how you discovered this happening? Because I've been on the other end where like you wake up and you turn on your computer and all of a sudden it's just a complete deluge and you don't really know what to do about it. It's very overwhelming.
That's horrible. What can I tell you? Being called that thing it's I can't really even speak about it. It's so hurtful because I mean, the idea of raping a child. I mean, do I need to? Well, I guess I do need to go into this. There's nothing worse. There's nothing worse. And to be associated with that in any way, I just can't tell you, Michael, like I haven't been able to sleep about this. It's the worst thing. And then death threats on top of that, although that's not even as bad as being called a child rapist. I can't, and for simply presenting ideas, I mean, I don't get it. And I'm horrified and I'm devastated, I guess is the word. But I'm going to keep going because
Yeah.
I think this is an important issue. I know it's an important issue. And there are many other important issues that are taboo, by the way, that I've talked about. And for whatever reason, I'm the guy, I've always been the guy who's been interested and willing to talk about the most difficult subjects, which is just the way I'm built. I've always been this way since I was a kid. And I don't think I can stop.
I know it's going to be very hard for you to kind of remove yourself from the center of this, but I think in some ways this is almost like the immune system, right? People are so concerned about any semblance of this slipping into normal society that as soon as there's the slightest indication that this is somehow being normalized, it's kind of like the white blood cells just completely swarm and just attack because I think if you look at the Jeffrey Epstein case, and this is not involving children, obviously, the fact that you were told for a long time, conspiracy theory, you're crazy, and then ABC News had all the goods on him and they swept her in the rug. Dennis Hastert, who was Speaker of the House,
Right.
I believe the longest serving Republican Speaker of the House in history. He went to
Right.
jail because with high school boys, something he was doing when he was a wrestling coach. So people like to think this is a partisan issue, which I think is psychotic. If you have these kind of urges, the fact that somehow this is going to affect your view on the balanced budget or
People who were assaulted as children, many people, of course. And it's always the central pain in their life.
yeah.
That's right.
You had a big tweet thread when you were explaining your position. Not that many people may have seen it. Can you reiterate any points you made in that thread that they have missed that maybe we didn't go over the show just to make it?
Sure. I think I went over all of it here though, but sorry, I just gotta
No
plug
worries.
this in. I said that that Kirshner and I did the episode in December 2020, that many months went by and many thousands of people listened to it and there was no controversy, which I still think is very interesting. And then the Libs of TikTok posted that clip, very short clip, in which I said the thing about defending adult child sex. And I then clarified what I meant by adult child sex, which was these things, according to the law, that are illegal, right? Like the 19-year-old and the 15-year-old, and, you know, the Elvis Presley case. You know, Priscilla Presley was 14 when they started, and then they got married, and then Priscilla never thought anything about it. What should we have done to Elvis Presley?
Yeah, but look
Should we
what happened. Her daughter married Michael Jackson, so clearly it couldn't have been all good.
Yeah, right. I mean, so that's, I mean, and Elvis is just one of many. We all know people, and many people
Jerry
have
Lee
grandparents.
Lewis.
Yeah, well, yeah, and many people have grandparents, you know, where that, again, it's really common, especially in that generation. So that's why I said those are the quote adult child sex. That's the quote adult child sex that I was defending. That. But I also said that my position on pedophiles is that if an adult cannot control their sexual urges with their children, they need to be placed in a concentration camp away from both the regular population and the prison population. And I also said that if I ever discovered an adult raping or molesting a child, I would want to kill them. But I also think those intense feelings that I have, that almost everyone has, they get in the way of rational judgment. And that's why we can't really have a good conversation, an important conversation about age of consent laws, because again, it's so emotional and so intense for understandable reasons, but it stops us from thinking rationally about it. And a lot of people have been damaged by this.
Why is it, this is such a minor point to ask, but I still want to, why is it important to you to separate them from the regular prison population?
I mean, then if you have them in the prison population, then it's just a free for all. I mean, you end up having just executions of people. I mean, by the prisoners, you know, I don't know if we want that. If we want civil wars inside the prison, I just think it's better just to completely separate them.
Is that, so that's the kind of, I don't, maybe you don't have any information either. I know that this is kind of one of those ideas in popular culture that when people who abuse children go to jail, that they're taken out by the other prisoners who have a, you know, their own kind of code of justice and honor. Is that a real thing?
I've heard it is. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Which again, I'm not losing any sleep over like a child.
No, I
rape.
understand what you're saying, but like,
But it's just, it becomes a double nightmare in prisons. Like prisons become like unmanageable if you do that. That's all.
but, and also the idea that, again, if someone's in college and they sleep with a high schooler, that they should be murdered in jail. I think that's, as opposed to someone who's a murderer or
Right.
someone who, you know, violently rapes women in some alley, you know,
Right.
I think that's going to be a hard one to
Right.
make
Right.
as well.
Right.
I suspect that any kind of pushback on this sex offender registry, you know, from talking to politicians, it's such a third rail that what politician wants to come forward and argue for changing this, the reaction toward them is, you know, we all know what it's going to look like.
Right.
When you talk to the person who made that movie, can you give me a little bit more of information of what the kind of political culture it is surrounding this?
It's a third rail, and this is the problem, right? I mean, I'm talking about it because no one will, because we need to talk about it because there's so many people being victimized by this, and the arguments that are made no one even pays attention to them, but when they're made, they often don't make any sense. So, but yes, the politics around it are exactly as you describe. It is a nuclear issue that no one feels like they can even broach, and therefore the sex offender registry just keeps going, just pulling in more and more people. And, you know, it's become, now we have, 1 out of 25 adults in the United States are on it. 250, 1 out of 250 adults in the United States are on the sex offender registry. I mean, this is a major problem. And I don't think any of us believe that all those adults deserve to be on there.
Yeah, I think it's very fair to say, like I said earlier, that, you know, someone who had a relationship with, again, 19 and 15, as opposed to someone who's a violent assailant, should be treated the same in regards to the law. And I don't think most people would disagree with that.
Right.
So you've been working on your next book for quite some time, Renegade. Can you talk a little bit about
that? Yeah. So it's on what I usually talk and write about, by the way, which is, in this case, it's the history of American foreign policy. going all the way back to the founding, actually before the founding, going back to Plymouth Rock, all the way to the present. And I look at the effects of American popular culture in the world and how the liberatory effects of American popular culture have subverted authoritarian regimes around the world. And I also make the argument that American military interventions have consistently produced blowback, not in the interest of Americans.
How far along are you coming with that?
I have about 20 pages left to write.
Holy crap.
Very close.
Wait, so this has been in the making for many years. So
Yes,
I don't,
many years.
I'm imagining your first deadline must have been 2017 or something crazy.
I'm not going to tell you, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah. So but the publisher's still on the hook.
Yes.
That's, I mean, that's amazing. You must feel ecstatic.
No, when I'm done with it, I will be. Yeah.
When I'm done with the book, I get a severe depression.
Really?
Yeah,
Hmm.
postpartum. You don't get that?
I might.
Well, you've
I
only
doubt it
done
this-
two, right? You've done two books.
Two, yeah, two. I think then this one will feel good when I finish it.
Do you have any vague publication date?
Let's say end of this year.
That's not possible.
Yeah, sure it is. They can crash a book, no problem.
Why?
They want to get it out by the election.
The midterms?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, that seems extremely ambitious. I'm sure it's not short.
No, I mean it's stretching it, but that's what they're shooting for. Yeah.
Okay.
It's most likely next year. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I wonder if I'm going to beat you to the punch because I don't have to deal with the publisher.
Oh, yeah, you should. You have no
and-
excuse.
Yeah, exactly. And let me assure you that, one of the reasons this also is striking a nerve with me is I'm writing right now about how during the Holodomor, many children were starved to death intentionally by the government. So when you're talking about children being, and especially being an uncle now, when people talk about children being harmed, it really has a disproportionate impact on my psyche. And I think for many other people, it's something that's so primal. Even dogs, when a kid's crying, get upset.
And you're not a parent. You're not a parent.
Exactly.
Like I
Yeah,
am.
you are. Yeah.
When you're a parent, you feel it in a different way that you really don't understand until you have kids.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's no one disputes that.
Right.
Thad, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this episode?
Your openness, your curiosity, and your willingness to have me on.
You are welcome.